For those who don't know,
Really?
Betty Hill was part of the 1961 famous abduction case with her and her husband.
Wait, hold on. Was that before she got abducted?
Well, the childhood case, it was before she was a kid. She had
right.
a Bigfoot experience, and then afterwards, she just got into it. And also, there's one quick story I want to read to you that was really, really amazing. One little paragraph that she quoted to the author. Betty was often approached by, I guess, police and officials asking about Bigfoot. So in the summer of 1975, this is what she said directly, I was visited by 2 state troopers who wanted to know what I knew about Bigfoot. They had received some reports of a UFO landing or crashing in the New Hampshire's something mountains I can't pronounce. Planes had gone out and search parties investigated on the ground, but nothing had been found. The mountains are real wilderness without even a pass through them. After these UFO reports, the state police began receiving reports of Bigfoot in the area. They were wondering if there were dangers associated with the creatures because a group of men were thinking of camping out in the mountains and seeing if they could make contact. So Betty Hill, people reached out to her. She was like king shit about Bigfoot. I thought that was interesting.
Wow. So maybe that's an interesting connection because, later she has a UFO abduction case happen to her. So maybe they were tracking her.
Yes. So I found 2 stories that really sum up everything in this book that's weird. There's lots of great stories in here, but there's 2. Here's a shorter one that really go into the high strangeness associated with Bigfoot that most people are either too scared to report or is underreported, or is reported and then no one ever, you never see it on Finding Bigfoot or anything. They're never going to put these stories on there, even though they're more common than you would think. So this takes place in the 1970s, 77, with a woman named Mrs. Jones who wants to remain anonymous. She lived in northern Wisconsin, and every summer she'd go up there by herself. Her husband would drive her up in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin to a cottage and leave her there for 6 weeks. I was like, what? It's trouble in the marriage.
What the hell's going on?
I was like, all right. That's one of those details. It's weird and interesting, but also makes it believable because you're like, Jesus, that's just fucking weird. So basically, this is how the story goes. She used to sit outside and read a book in the summer. And then one day she was just sitting there and the book suddenly was forced out of her hands, ripped out of her hands by nothing in particular, and thrown on the ground. And then she heard something in her head. She didn't use the word telepathy until after the fact. She had a 5th grade education. But she said, I heard something in my head. And she looks up and 50 yards away, there's a giant Bigfoot from the waist up behind a ledge looking at her with auburn hair, just standing there. And in her head, she can hear him pleasantly laugh and just say, sorry, I've been noticing your thoughts. I live around here, and your thoughts are very, I like your thoughts. They're very peaceful and pure. And I just wanted to say,
Oh
I just wanted to say hi to you. And
Wait,
That's
hold
the
on a
best
second.
pickup line
I have
ever.
gotten this pickup line before. I know
Yeah, I
this
was gonna
one.
say.
This one works all the time.
Yeah.
This does not end in bestiality Bigfoot scenes. Just to be clear, it's a nice little relationship between a Bigfoot and an older woman.
That's sweet.
Or
He's really into the way I think. That's so sweet. Okay. All right.
So she developed this relationship with this being that she could hear. And now she wouldn't always see him. She could sense him around. There's a vibration in the air. You could really sense this thing. And she would hear it talk to her. And she all the time in the summer, she'd have multiple encounters with this being. One night, the next summer, she heard about a bunch of break-ins in the area. And she got a little scared. So her husband gave her a .22. Well, she had a .22 and a baseball bat in the house, whatever. Her husband wasn't there. And one night she went outside and was smoking a cigarette and saw 2 men nearby, behind their barn. And she ran back inside. The 2 men came to the front door and tried to get in. Were obviously trying to get in when suddenly they both screamed and ran off. She opens the door and she doesn't see anything. And then she sees, obviously, her friend standing over in the corner. And then through telepathy, he's like, I sensed your thoughts and your emotions that something bad was happening, so I came to help you. And, and then after that... And that was... And now no one's going to believe that story. That coming out of my mouth, I'm like, nah, get the fuck out of here. That didn't happen. But there's
I loved hearing of that.
after story after story like this. This is why it's interesting to me. Now, here's the next part. So... This is corroborated in multiple different stories. This is what I wanted to get to, which is really bizarre. It's the next part of this that just really is fucking weird as fuck. So one night she's sitting on her porch and she overlooks the forest and there's lights, UFOs. She called them lights. Whizzing around the forest, approaching, coming down, illuminating the floor from a distance you kind of see. And she was like, what's going on here? And she starts to hear a noise, a generator sound, turning on and off all night. It's almost sputtering. And it went on and on and on and on. She could hear it. And... she was like, what the hell was that? her neighbors came over, and they were concerned too, and apparently they went out to go look what the hell was going on, and they were too scared to talk about it. Next day, Sasquatch friend comes by, and she asks him, like, what the fuck was that? And he says he's not going to tell her. He's just not going to say anything. Now, the author of the story also has a personal experience where he was tracked and stalked by a Bigfoot up in the mountains near a cave. And he heard the same thing for like 48 hours. He heard the same sound coming from the ground. He didn't see UFOs, but the same situation. He encountered a Bigfoot that was obviously keeping away from the cave, and he sensed this really crazy noise underground. This same story has been heard in the Bigfoot community for a long time. Hearing a UFO, lights associated with Bigfoot, just like the Sierra sounds, just like the documentary Missing 411. They didn't talk about just Bigfoot and weird sounds. They talked about lights. They talked about a lot of weird shit. It's not just Bigfoot. It's high strangeness. There's multiple things going on. So this sets up the next story, the really crazy story. You thought that was crazy. That was more like fun Bigfoot time. This involves the CIA and this family called the Jeffrey family, who the author was in communication with for about 6 years as he got this story. So they lived west of the Rockies, and most of this took place in the 80s. They were a very religious, conservative family. And by the end of this story, they became more fearful of the CIA than Bigfoot. This reads like something that can't be real, but you hear report after report about these types of things happening. So they went camping west of the Rockies, and it all started when their 2 daughters went to pick up wood. One looked up, and there was a Bigfoot right in front of her. She fainted. Nothing bad happened, so the family wasn't that spooked out. They continued hanging out by their camper. They had a fire. They were by a lake, and they were playing cards, and they just kind of kept it cool because nothing bad happened. They heard thumping noises. They heard something walking around the camper. They started to get a little scared. In the middle of the night, something grabbed the front door and slowly started to pull it open, but didn't come in. So they looked outside, and they could see a giant silhouette, like just walking around their campsite. At first, it kind of starts scary. You're like, what the hell's going on here? It's just a horror movie. Nope, it's more like a Golombesky show. It's going to start scary, but it's going to get awesome. So the next day, they walk out to the lake, and there's all these Bigfoot prints along the lake, but there's all this trout laid out on the lake, like almost like a gift. I mean, at first, they didn't interpret it that way, but it became...
oh, interesting.
It was like a gift, and they were like, this is weird, okay. Thanks for the trout, Bigfoot. So they ended up catching trout, the family, the Jeffreys, and they laid the trout out that night on their picnic table, and sure enough, that night, Bigfoot walked out, they watched him, grabbed the trout, and walked off. Didn't say thank you, just grabbed it and walked off, which is really interesting. So by the weekend, more campers showed up, and Bigfoot left. They didn't see him for a while. And that was the end of that. But they kept coming back. They were obviously fascinated. They couldn't stop talking about it. It was the number one thing the family talked about all the time. They couldn't get over it. So they kept going back and back. But one thing they noticed when these things were around, it wasn't never... They started to sense them. Like, it wasn't like you had to see them to know they were there. You start to feel an energy, especially if you got close to a place they didn't want you to go. It'd feel oppressive. You could sense them. You could know that you could hear them, but not see them. Clearly something's going on. Like, they could hear something that clearly should be in front of you, but there's nothing there. Not like in the woods where you can't really see what's going on. Like, what's going on here? This interdimensional aspect of the whole thing. But the craziest incident is they started going out at night because they wanted to encounter these things more. They weren't scared anymore. They realized they were friendly. There's some sort of gift exchange going on. And they went out and started knocking with sticks on trees to get the Bigfoot's attention. And they started hearing knocks back. And again, like, that's a famous Squatch thing. Knocking on trees with sticks is always heard when Squatches are around. It's like a warning, or they're communicating. It could be either other. But I want to read a passage. It's one of the greatest things I ever read in my life. The Jeffrey family decided to hide in a brush in an effort to catch a glimpse of a Bigfoot. Before long, they were astounded by an ungodly cry unlike anything they'd ever heard before. What they observed in the moments that followed was beyond their wildest imaginations. They reported that the Sasquatch stepped out of the forest holding a flashlight device and directed the beam up in the air while howling upwardly. During this time, other unseen creatures hit their sticks against hollow logs, making a loud drum thud. There were 3 bangs,
Classic,
then
yep.
a pause. 3 bangs, then a pause. Always 3. Within minutes, a round, saucer-shaped glowing object appeared on the horizon and hovered over the trees directly above the Sasquatch.
Whoa.
So the family was like, whoa, what's happening? No one's going to believe this. And they obviously, they bolted and got the fuck out of there and observed the glowing from the distance. And apparently other people witnessed it as well. They even witnessed the same kind of event on another night on another camping trip. They noticed all this stuff. And then the next thing happened, which is just so bizarre. It was a foggy morning. and they went out looking in the area where the ships were after the second time this event happened. And they went walking along the campshore, and they actually had a couple camping buddies with them during this time. And all of a sudden, they just saw a huge log on the ground, and all of a sudden, this is what happened. I'll read from the book. Soon, to their surprise, a 3.5 to 4 foot tall being, resembling a tiny man, walked mechanically down the log. He wore a type of spacesuit. The odd-looking, hairless being jumped off the end of the log and began digging in the earth. He wore no helmet or any visible breathing device. This freaked out the woman that was with them, and she ran off screaming. But the being never reacted to anything they did. They tried to call to it. They tried to talk to it. It just eventually walked off, which is super interesting in its own take. So after all this, they're in some high strangeness that no one's ever seen before. They go home and start noticing a black car outside their house over and over again. Every time they leave, this car follows them. Eventually, they get a message on their phone, which also they can hear, like, you know, when your phones tap classic, like in an 80s movie where you can hear, like, clicking and shit. That was going on.
Yeah.
And then they get a message that says, if you go back to the forest looking for Bigfoot, we'll shoot you in the head.
What?
Just like, and
Jesus.
they're like, holy shit. They don't know what's going on. So eventually, these guys knock on the door. And they're like, have you seen UFOs and Bigfoot? Like, tell me about it. And he's like, who are you guys? And they wouldn't give their identification. Eventually, they gave it was CIA. And they're like, it's a matter of national security. Can we talk to you? And he's like, well, what do you want to know? And he's like, well, can you take us to the campsite and let us know what's going on? And he's like, sure, but you can't bring a gun because they don't like guns. They can sense your thoughts and intentions, and they won't show up. And it's just bad. I don't want them to think that, like, we're going to hurt them. They go to the campsite. Of course, when the CIA guy has a gun, he says bullshit. He leaves. Later on, much later, towards the end of the story, which we're almost there anyways, the CIA looks like they set up cameras all throughout this place to look for him. Because the cameras weren't there, then suddenly they were. We don't know that for sure, but that's what the guy was saying. Mm-hmm. So what Mr. Jeffries has stated about his experiences, you feel these vibrations or presence. You could sense them. You could realize they could read your thoughts and intentions. And the craziest part about this, which is, I've heard this in multiple stories, the same thing. One night he was at the campsite, this is over a decade, and he had an encounter where he saw a Bigfoot that was really nervous out in the field. He saw it, and it kind of just went back into the forest. He was like, okay, whatever, that was weird. Usually it's a different experience. So he drives home, and he's in his house, and his wife's making dinner, and he walks in, and all of a sudden he gets that same feeling he gets in the woods, like something's watching him, an invisible something's watching him. And he panics, and he runs to the door, and he's like, okay, I'm just like kidding myself. This is crazy town. And then a visible hand grabs his shoulder and pulls him back, and he stumbles back. And he's like, what the fuck was that? And he realized that whatever it was then projected, like, I'm not trying to hurt you, I was just curious, and I followed you, and left. But the fact that it could, like, follow you all the way back to your home and, like, be there invisibly is just really creepy, but also a story I've heard dozens of times in the Bigfoot community.
I mean, why are they curious, though? Like, what is it they're... I mean, obviously, it's like they're communicating. With the family, it's kind of cute, you know? Like, it's like they're lonely, right?
Yes.
Kind of.
Well, yeah, they're a species, and... Oh, sorry, go on. Finish your thought.
No, but with this one, it just seemed... It's like, what does he want? I don't know. It's weird. It's just...
They're curious.
Well, I don't know what he wants, but I always love Native American takes on things. And this guy, this is from Standing Elk. He's a Lakota spiritual leader, and it's taken directly from him. And he had multiple Sasquatch encounters over his life, starting with... This is the thing. It starts in dreams, and you're like, that's bullshit. It's not whatever. I had a dream about a Bigfoot. Then all of a sudden, like, you're having an astral experience, or you're outside your body, and you're interacting with one. You're like, what the fuck? That's just crazy. Maybe I was a dream, too. Then you see one in person, and then you have the same thought. Then you're like, okay, what the fuck's happening? This is high strangeness. So eventually this guy got in contact with a Sasquatch that came to him as like a blinding white light, this Native American chief. And he said, hello, my name is Sasquatchian. I am chief of the Sasquatch peoples. I am one called Bigfoot, Yeti, a bottomless snowman. I am known to the indigenous peoples of Mother Earth as Shia Tanka. I live within the fourth and fifth dimension frequencies, and I sit with star nations in higher realms with the Council of 22. Sasquatchy loves two-leggeds. He loves two-leggeds because they are the spiritual brothers and sisters, and we are committed to help them to return to sacred responsibility or enlightenment. Your three-dimensional realities are very primitive to us. We respect Mother Earth, blah, 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 blah. We're here to help you. So basically the thesis, and it's backed up by all these different people. I could read like 10 things to you, but I think this is going too long. But they basically are saying,